Welcome to Digital Difference, hosted by Microsoft. We're in Stockholm, and we do now have a live audience. Thank you for pressing pause on Netflix and joining us today in our august panel, which I will introduce in a second. My name is Azim Azar, and I'm an analyst and an investor who's looking at changing the way technology is changing society. We have spent today exploring the relationship between technology and its ability to fast track global climate goals. And it's been a really diverse day, and I'm going to go through some of the kind of key points that were raised by our speakers and in discussion. Ben Coombs, who really started the day for us, talked about the economic opportunity of achieving some of these climate goals. We're really quite significantly, I think you said $4 trillion as a $5 trillion to global GDP, which is very, very significant. But also you highlighted the complexity, the complexity of the solution set and the complexity of the problem definition that entails. We also heard from a number of organizations who are really active. We had Luke, you were talking about the role of tracing the impact of tracing supply chains to understand the impact that you were having with your products from, I guess, farm to table, or from wherever they're plucked to being processed to being delivered to you. Had some very interesting case studies with Schneider Electric and Ecolab on how these large companies are activating their organizations to think about being essentially zero footprint. In the case of Schneider Electric, a goal that is an explicit goal for the company over the next few years. And I think, it's David, right? Correct. Yes. On Ecolab's front, I took away this critical fact, which was that in a typical city, and remember that within 15 years, 70% of humanity will live in cities, 40% of the energy is used in moving, cleaning, storing, transporting the water. So understanding how better to make use of the water, by the way, in many parts of the world we get plenty of it from the sky, is actually quite a critical imperative. And then we also heard from one of our colleagues from Sentia, which is a fascinating startup tackling this question about how can you make packaging for certain products smarter and less impactful, and then hearing from a different side from Juha from Ecolab, from Stora Enso.
Lucky you.
Yeah, lucky you. Yeah, you swapped roles. It's a lot of names to hold. But Juha from Stora Enso on some of the kind of critical innovations in the pulp side, and how do you make this stuff reusable? I love the fact you've got dissolvable RFID tags, which seems like a great idea. But I believe you're from Finland.
Yes.
It's a very dry, hot climate there?
I would say no, very moist,
So,
I would say,
yes,
and cold.
I think you have to test those RFID tags a little bit to get them working perfectly in the wet Finnish weather.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
we prefer warehouses which are, keeping the rain outside.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Well, so now we've got a session until 3:30 where we are going to tackle this one question, which is about how can the circular economy really become the new normal. And I will ask the panel to say something, but let's just say a little bit about the circular economy. The fundamental idea is, can we move from an economy that looks like a value chain where stuff comes in at the beginning, gets consumed all the way out, and there's a bunch of waste at the end that we throw into the landfill in the ground or the landfill in the sky that we call our atmosphere, into an economy where things move in a nice cycle, what we will explore in this discussion is how real that is and what we can do ultimately to get there. But let's kick off by just getting a very, very brief introduction from each of the panelists, who you are, and a particular claim that's relevant to our discussion now, perhaps starting with you, Nina.
Yes, hello everybody. So my name is Nina Lund and I lead the retail and consumer goods business here in Europe for Microsoft. So how can we become more circular? In the large enterprise space that we work with, the companies are really thinking about sustainability as a top-of-mind topic, particularly here in Europe. It's a true topic for our European business leaders. Well, one is getting and instilling, and with your help in the community, a sense of urgency, a need to act, not only talk, but act. We're entering this critical decade now. And with this sense of urgency comes this responsibility to be very deliberate about the types of data that you're going to collect. Being sustainable about that, meaning also that you're going to decide what data you're going to throw away, because the world would be very, very filled with opportunities to collect all kinds of data. But many companies are still working on what their strategy is for using that data, whether it's to create a better consumer experience or empower their people better, or make their supply chains more efficient. So that's definitely one. And then we've talked today a lot about partnering, opening up and realizing that disruption is not the same thing as disruption was maybe even 5 or 10 years ago in the business world. Disruption will come from unexpected places, and collaborating with different partners with different skills that bring different things to the table can allow you to go faster.
Thank you. So, Juha, just a brief intro to yourself and Stora Enso, and we'll come round.
Yep. Juha Majala from Stora Enso, Finland, as we heard, and working for Intelligent Packaging, which is a new innovation area within Stora Enso, which Stora Enso is a renewable materials company, but Intelligent Packaging focuses on itemization of goods and items. So that means, for example, from circular economy point of view and from sustainability point of view, that we want to trace in a better the goods and items itemized, where they are going, where they are coming, and we push the ecological RFID there forward, and this enables then kind of secondary streams within the supply chain. So for example, not only optimizing the kind of a demand and sales of it, but also secondary streams that you need to in a certain state deviate from the supply chain, or then for example create a secondary market that if you are not able to sell the goods, you are able to sell them forward, for example with the best before dates, or there is some kind of a garment issue or something like that.
Super interesting. Yeah, thank you. David, circularity and water.
Yes, so hi, I'm David, David Martin from Ecolab. Circularity, well, we can say a lot about that, but I only have a minute. So the base of circular economy is actually resource efficiency. That's how circular economy was developed. And so one of the key resources close to the heart of Ecolab is water, and it's trying to find the way to preserve water and at the same time make business thrive with that. And that's the conversation we'll be happy to engage in.
Thank you. Ben.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ben Coombs. I'm from PwC in the UK. I'm based in London. I've co-founded a practice around innovation and sustainability, which is looking at how we can use emerging tech to really accelerate to tackle the environmental challenges we're facing, from climate change to biodiversity to water, all of these types of things. I mean, for me, the circular economy is about the design phase. I mean, we're not that bad at recycling certain materials. So, for example, in aluminium, I think post-Second World War, 2/3 of the aluminium that has been created is still in use today. But the real issue is, how do you bring that into the design phase so that the way in which recycling is happening, the way in which we're thinking about our materials is purposeful rather than someone else's problem further down the supply or value chain. So I think that's where what's really exciting about today is how we're seeing all elements of the value chain working together to think about, well, when you're giving it to me like this isn't how it's going to work well. It would be better if it was like that. And I think that those elements of everyone working more collectively together in a more community way hopefully will lead to more efficient outcomes, less resources used, and it could be better for the bottom line as well in many of these cases.
Luke, please.
Hello, so I'm Luc Domessier. I work for SGS Transparency One. We worked on supply chain transparency, and as we saw this morning, transparency brings responsibility. We think that there's a big power on the market now with the consumers wanting to have more information about the products that they are using, but also the ingredients, the way they are done, and if ethical and social and responsible environmental behavior are doing. So that's what we address. This solution combines a digital platform, Transparency One, and the associated services of SGS, which is certification, verification, and inspection leader in the world. And the idea is that we map the entire supply chain from the very source, from the farms, from the forest, the mines, etc., down to the end products in the stores, to the consumers. And this is a very powerful drive to get all the actors along the supply chain behave better.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's just start with some level setting. It's a very appealing idea, the circular economy. How far along are we with it? How big is it? Ben, would you take a shot at that?
I mean, I think it comes down to the incentive structures. So the reason that aluminium is well recycled is because it has an inherent value, and there is that value to bring it back into the production line, and you know, people in places, I'm half American, in California they give you 5 to 10 cents for giving a can back. But what we really need to see is where is that value throughout the value chain. So where are the incentives, either through regulation, policy, voluntary agreements from companies, labeling with QR codes. There's talk of labeling fast food with your license plate when you pick it up. You know, what are the sort of push and pull measures that we need to make sure that we see a much more holistic element of, you know, materials recycling? And we're certainly, you know, we're certainly a way off now. I mean, we've had the landfill tax in the UK, which has been, I think, one of the most successful environmental measures in its early years, because it was on a trajectory that showed credibility, that showed consistency, and let companies strategically invest in what they needed. So policy certainty is really important here about the direction of travel and the speed of travel, so that investments can be made. And where we see real problems are when you flip-flop with, you know, feed-in tariffs or these types of things, and no one knows whether to invest or not. So I think a really strong mandate, a strong set of measures that governments and the international community can stick behind could really accelerate this.
Yeah. So one seems to be about incentives and policy. What about technological approaches? Are there technological levers that we can pull, technological innovations that might accelerate the move towards circularity? Who would like to say that?
Yeah, so definitely we had Electrolux here earlier today, and one of the key places, they've been on a sustainability journey for a very, very long time. One of the key places that they've made very available to all of their executives is the visibility of the supply chain. It's very, very important for decision makers to be able to see what's happening in the supply chain and understand, to be able to analyze the insights and then act upon them. And that is a space for, especially for enterprises, both large and small, where it's a fairly easy place to start. And then there are all kinds of technologies. Some are more difficult to grasp for the general public, but there are ways to measure all kinds of points in the supply chain, for example, today. You can kit sensors pretty much everywhere. In fact, you can even put sensors in your light bulbs and measure activity or movement or energy consumption.
Yeah, if you go to in a way, what is the state and how to see it, I would say that it's really on its beginning also in that sense, because it requires changes, and the changes are depending also on the fact, for example, with our businesses, we are working with the fast-moving consumer goods. Those are physical products. So with the physical products, when you get those digitalized, get those traced, it's actually taking a bit more time than if you have only a kind of software related, these kind of startups that you create an app that it goes live, goes over the globe immediately. But when you're talking about circular economy, it's about clothes, it's about food, it's about metals, and it's a physical thing. So there is time delays, but I see step changes, but radical changes can be done.
One of the things I'm curious with, we heard about the incentives and we've heard about the supply chain. I'm curious about what the logistics component of the circular economy needs to look like, and how we tackle it. And I'm wondering, you in the case of your business, your products are around lots of the things that come in through the door. How have you been thinking about the sort of the collection of that?
The good example is the e-commerce, how it's operating. It's really struggling with the returns in that sense. So it's an open space. But I dare see that the better you are aware what is happening to the goods. So it's sensor is one option, but also just the traceability, that you know that this good is going somewhere. It's happening this one. If it's not tampered, it's not open, you can return it back to the marketplace. And actually avoid the return of the goods. And kind of there was a good comment today that companies have their warehouses in trucks. Yeah. So in that sense, when the trucks are moving, don't take the goods back to the warehouses, but enable the connectivity for the goods and be able to sell it forward, for example, from there.
There's as well just to build on that, because obviously when you think logistics, you think the packaging of whatever product you're selling and the packaging of taking it back if needed. There's as well the localization of where you produce your stuff. And, there's been over the years a tendency to try and centralize this in special locations because it's probably feels more efficient, but then the logistic becomes much trickier and becomes less sustainable. So I know, Ecolab being one of them, where we've made sure to keep our production in country close to the customers,
right?
Which is makes it a bit more complex, but at least it helps resolve this logistical challenge of having to move stuff all over the world, and sometimes problem happens, and it's much easier and, let's say, more impactful from a carbon perspective to have a local manufacturer. So that's maybe a very practical angle to that.
I'm curious about whether you see this change that David's alluded to in the supply chains that you look at. Are they becoming more localized, or are they still as big and global and spidery as we were used to?
Well, in fact, part of the problem is that the supply chain did really get more complicated in the 10 recent years and really internationalized. And most of the problem and the crisis come from there. It's always a supplier in rank 3 or rank 4 or even above that has changed something.
Could you just say what you mean by rank 3 or rank 4, just for the audience?
It's a theoretical way to see the supply chain, meaning that the end products is provided by rank 1 rank of suppliers, which get their components or ingredients for rank 2, etc. It's theoretical because it's much more complicated than that. But first thing, those chains got complicated. In food, you get 3 to 4 ranks. In textile, about 6 or 7 ranks. It's very internationalized, and the problem comes from there. So one of the impact of transparency, for example, for Danone, for whom we are working at the moment, is that they want, of course, to promote local products and local production. We went to Russia recently. They will have a campaign on baby food. And Russia is such a huge country that not only are they sourcing from Russia, but also from different regions. And they will promote that. But also they will try to buy more and more locally.
Very interesting. Yeah.
One comment on that one. We had introduced today the unmanned store concept when we are talking about the new retail solution, which is a creating these kind of small stores locally, fully automated. And in that sense, when you think about the delivery models there, it's actually the conventional ones are not suitable for that one, because usually you are driving with a big truck to a supermarket and putting the goods in. So it's actually kind of asking for innovations in delivery models, and there are these kind of scooter drivers, bicycle deliveries, and all sorts of applications that you can be a delivery person for a product. So these enable it, but what it's going to be in the long term, it's a development path that we are living.
One of the things that fascinates me is, I think everybody, correct me if I'm wrong, is from a sort of advanced economy on this panel, and a lot of the things we're talking about already exist in essentially in the global south. The tiffin tin for your Indian meal rather than the plastic that you throw away, the reuse, the collection of the tin foil and the buckets, and exactly with that mobile workforce that is available. And so I'm curious about whether there will be lessons for circularity in terms of systems design and innovation that might come from, outside where our recent 30 years of innovation has come from, which has been Silicon Valley, right? Can we go beyond the valley to look for answers here?
Well, we've definitely seen a shift in innovation for both retailers and brands, moving from even just a few years ago, moving from the west to the east to going the other way. The Chinese retailers are piquing everybody's curiosity. So our Western retailers want to go and see how retail is done in China. They don't necessarily want to replicate how retail is done in China, by the way, but they're very, very curious because it's seen to be a very innovative way to do it. But that depends, to your point, Azim, on also a number of local players and a tremendous amount of job opportunity that gets created locally. And so I think we have some lessons definitely in Europe, at least, to learn from them.
Barbara, should we take some questions from the group or from further afield? Yeah, of course. Does anyone have any questions for the group here? Yeah, please.
Yes. A lot of the conversation we've had today is about very advanced European economies. I come from Africa, so I'm quite curious if you've got any thoughts, anybody, about how this kind of sustainability can be introduced into emerging market economies, especially with the understanding that it could just leapfrog decades of stuff we never had.
It's a great big question.
Just a short aside. Plastic bags are being banned all over the continent, including by Al-Shabaab, the terrorist movement. Our terrorist movements are very economically or environmentally progressive. Just by the way, what are yours like?
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's a fantastic question. The laughter is because Toby pointed out that plastic bags have been banned all over Africa, including by Al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist movement. So they're a pretty advanced terror group. And the question really was, what are the lessons, the opportunities for the developing economies here? Maybe again, it's a huge question. So some quick fire suggestions. Go ahead, Juha.
I was thinking about the legacy systems actually that we are kind of struggling with. Is they don't exist in that sense in for example in Africa. And a good example is how China went to the mobile networks and mobile phones. So they didn't have the landlines and they didn't have the burden of transforming that one. So it's I would say as an opportunity almost.
Yeah, I think distributed energy, distributed water, all of these types of next generation ways in which we're going to do grid management means that sub-Saharan Africa, lots of these regions are going to be able to develop hopefully a lot quicker. And I think also if we can get some of the basic tech to Africa, and that's a big if, and I don't just mean handing a laptop to people because we know that didn't work, but if we can really reskill and upskill, there is definitely a chance to leapfrog because, there's definitely a first mover disadvantage. My example of that is the London Underground. Those deep tunnels and where you can't have air conditioning is not a good thing. If you're going to build a metro system now, you can build it much better. And I think we can learn from that, 3D printing in manufacturing, blockchain traceability through supply chains. There are ways in which you would design something very differently now as Africa goes on its development journey through the 21st century. And I really hope that there can be that technology transfer of both skills and materials, and that's something that needs to come.
Can I pick you up on something? Because you said decentralized energy just now, and I had noticed in the morning in Bren's brilliant presentation, he also talked about decentralized energy. And I had a discussion with Václav Smil, who's a historian of energy, a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned decentralized distributed energy to him. It didn't make the cuts in the podcast, and he was quite dismissive about its possibilities and its scale. Where is it really, and does it really have a chance over the next decade to move the dial in energy production?
Yeah, I think let's just talk about the West, where I know more about in terms of current systems. We've got power systems that currently flow one way. They're big power stations, whether they be coal or gas, or sometimes oil, but more coal and gas, pumping out electricity around a network. it's quite a big change to suddenly say we want people to be able to put stuff onto the network and for it to flow in both directions and everyone know how much is going in and coming out. But I think that the idea of the distributed grids is the fact that how those solar panels are connected or how those wind turbines are connected between communities doesn't necessarily have to be through a grid. And a grid is very expensive to build. It costs a lot to maintain. And if we can connect people using digital technology, the great thing about digitalization is that digital systems talk to one another and are better than mechanical systems at that. And that's where I think the real opportunity is. And that's why, you know, coal and gas are more difficult in that sense.
Fantastic. We're running a little bit short of time, so I'm going to see if there are any other questions out for our audience. Right. So I have a question now about generations. We've heard about geography, we heard about gender. Let's talk about generations. Yesterday, are there any Lithuanians in the room by any chance? Extracted. Well, yesterday Lithuania got its first internet unicorn, where Vinted, which is a second-hand marketplace for clothes, raised money, is worth more than $1 billion. The equivalent in the UK is a site called Depop, which all girls between the ages of 17 and 25 in the UK are obsessed with reselling their clothes, their H&Ms and Zara's and fast fashion and other things. And it's doing super well. And so I have this question about whether what we can learn from this younger generation. You know, we're all a bit wizened and we're the younger ones compared to the people running the companies. Are we getting the knowledge and the values and the behavior from that younger generation? Could they help us in our drive for circularity?
Not nearly enough. In fact, most of the conversations I have with the companies that we service, I recommend warmly for the executives in those companies to get themselves not a millennial mentor, mind you, a Gen Z mentor. Millennial was a few years ago very, very relevant. Gen Z is a very, very different generation.
How old would a Gen Z person be?
Well, I happen to have one millennial and one Gen Z at home. My children are like that, born like that. And my daughter's attitude is very, very different from my son's. He's much more forgiving about, you know, he got a driver's license. Our daughter said, I'm not having a driver's license. Our daughter stopped using bottled shampoo and shower gel many years ago already. She's moved to bars of soap. And it's her kind of way of manifesting this. So Gen Z mentors for the executive boardrooms I call for. And the one thing that we're really big on at Microsoft, and I can't stress this enough, is to learn again. And to learn to love to learn again. If we don't have the curiosity and to find out what others are doing about this and how we can bring our talents and our skills to the table, we will not go as fast as we need to.
Generational expertise. Do you think we need it?
We all need talent in our companies. We are interviewing people all the time. Let's just listen to what they say. And in what they're saying, they're asking for change. They're asking to have an impact, a purpose, and quickly, and be truthful and transparent about that. And I think that's exactly what we hear in every interview we do. So it's just implement that.
I think we're all here. We all grew up in an analog world. So when I left school, I think there were 2 computer rooms with 10 computers each. And the children of today grew up in a digital world, and that's fundamentally different in the way that this younger generation thinks, in a totally different way. I'm not sure that we would have come up with those same solutions that some of the younger generation are, and that's why they need to be listened to and understood, because they're growing up in the world that this generation designed, but they're living it and working in it and growing in it. And so definitely for me, you know, the average age at PwC is 27. Across the whole firm, across our 250,000 people. So we really need to understand what is going to be the driver for the next generation and drive us to better solutions.
The youngsters are teaching us in the way they are consuming, in the way they are accepting to work for companies now. So just an anecdote, in France, there's an application that appeared 1 year ago. 12 million people uploaded it. It's just saying you if the goods the food that you're buying is good or not for your health. A huge proportion of the youngsters have uploaded it. It's my 3 kids do shop with this. It gives you a red flag, orange or green. It has a huge impact on the market, like Intermarché, who is the 3rd largest French retailer in France and one of our customers. He has decided to change all of his 900 recipes, own label product recipes, to be compliant with this application. Second thing, in the fashion industry, I see customers that have difficulty hiring now because the youngsters don't want to work in a sector that has a very bad reputation as far as responsibility is concerned.
Thank you very much. Well, we are out of panel time, so let me just try to bring the session and the day together. I mean, I think we have reasons to be optimistic but not complacent. One of the things that I have certainly learned is just how seriously some quite critical companies are taking some of these issues and leveraging their expertise, whether it's in water or electrics or packaging or retail, to go tackle these questions head first. But as the economist in the room has constantly reminded us, Ben, from the moment he started this morning through to many of his interjections, is that incentives also really matter at a systems level, and we don't necessarily have those right. I think we've also heard in a number of different guises that although technology creates a lot of potentials for us, technology on its own is a blunt hammer. Without the incentives, without the values that leaders can bring, without the humanistic intent. We're sitting in a northern latitude here, in a country that is sort of renowned for its great treatment of waste, and also renowned for its gender parity, but as some reminders that there is a lot that we can learn from the global south, that the problems are very different even amongst the advanced economies, as well as getting into less developed economies. And that perhaps we can also reflect on some of the innovations and learn from our younger generation. So just to finally conclude, a big thank you to Microsoft, I think, for hosting us today, and in particular to Barbara, who's all the way at the back there, for putting all of this together. Thank you very much.